Preterist Pilgrim Weekend 2021. This is part 2 of Leviticus, Daniel, and Revelation, a preterist investigation presented by Al Person. And that's me. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be able to be back with you again today. So we're going to continue on from our discussion yesterday. Once again, I want to thank Dawn and the team for making this possible. And I'm just honored to be with you here today. It's just such a privilege to be coming to you from Sydney, Australia. Wonderful what we can do electronically, isn't it? Well, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. The video that you see is produced with a combination of natural and artificial light. So if the sun gets really bright outside, and it's that time of year where this is going to happen here, the lighting will change in the middle of a recording. It's like, oh, now what? Well, we'll just push through. And housekeeping, continuing. This down here is the place that I go to change the screen. So I flip it back and forth with the keyboard. So that's what I'm doing. And then over there is some of my notes to keep me going. So we don't edit these after the fact. We put them all together, just make them work in one single shot. Been doing this for about a year, and I've since the lockdown period, and I've kind of gotten a little bit more comfortable with it. But of course, without a studio, you have these challenges. And there's a lot to learn. I'm probably going to put a tutorial up as to how this happens and help people who want to get started on the way to do it at some time soon. Who knows? It's another topic for another time. Well, we spent a lot of time in the last session looking at Leviticus 26 as the root, the seed, or the core document, the source for the judgments in Leviticus. No, hang on, Leviticus 26 for the judgments in Deuteronomy 27, 28, 29, and 30. And we also noted that Leviticus 26 very strongly informs the Song of Moses. What I want to do today is take a look at the first and the last verses of Leviticus 26 to just give us a bit of a pointer here. We didn't look at this one the other day, and the last one we did not spend a lot of time on, or this one the previous session. Here we go. This is the opening of Leviticus 26, 1 and 2. You shall not make idols for yourselves, or erect an image or pillar, and you shall not set up a figured stone in your land to bow down to it, for I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. I would think that it's fair to say that this statement it describes the spirit of the law. This statement talks about the fact that you shall not have idols. You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. Now, of course, it's not the detail of the law. The detail of the law is very significant. We see it in the first 5 books of the Bible, the first 4, and Leviticus particularly, and then restated in Deuteronomy. But it is extremely close to the picture, all of this. Now, you will notice that the strong emphasis on not worshiping idols. What is an idol, or how does that work? Anything in the created order can be an idol. God is not in the created order. God exists in and of himself. He has aseity. He is not affected by anything. He is not contingent on anything. Worship only goes to God, not the created order. So if you look at this text like this, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, thou shalt not bow down to them nor serve them, for I, the Lord, the God, am a jealous God. Well, you see these things, you see a graven image is something in the created order. Even angels are in the created order. Note what happened when in the book of Revelation, the writer went to worship at the feet of the angel. The angel said, you must not do that. As wonderful and magnificent as anything in the created order might be, including even the physical universe itself, it must not be worshipped. It is in the created order. So this is God saying, I am completely other. I'm other to everything. God is not on a scale. In other words, one person is strong, another one is stronger, and God is the ultimate strongest. Don't put God on a scale. One thing is holy, another thing is holier, and God is the ultimate holiest. No, God is not on any scale with anything we do. He's totally other. And it's really important to understand this. And this is the message, or one of the messages that he's giving to his covenant people. And we see it, we rely on it in our current understanding of who God is and our current theology as well. So don't worship anything in the created order. Keep my Sabbaths, reverence my sanctuary. We also noted a passage in the very much the middle of Leviticus 26 where God said that he would unsheath his sword behind them. They would leave the land, he'd unsheath the sword. Where do we get that from? What's that mean? What does it say to us? Well, the other time that happened is Eden, where God said, you're leaving, and I'm sure it's drawn from there. You're leaving and you're not coming back till I'm ready to let you back. They would not be able to get back into covenant until they had done what God had required them to do. If you remember the prayer that Daniel prayed a prayer very much around Leviticus 26. Yes, we've sinned. Yes, we've done this. You've walked contrary to us. You're holy. You're utterly holy, Lord God. You're perfect in every way. We come before you admitting our sin. We have not obeyed you, and so on and so forth. So you get that whole sense of Daniel's prayer. Now, Daniel knew that the time was up from the prophet Jeremiah, and we see a commentary in the end of the book of Chronicles, which clearly says that the land had to endure its Sabbaths, and they were not allowed back from the exile until that happened. So that's important. We also note from the last prophetic statement in the Old Testament, Malachi, that that things were not well. We noted from in the last session that even after the people returned from exile, Nehemiah records that they continued to sin immediately. They stopped honoring the Sabbath. They didn't care for the Levites. They charged interest amongst themselves. You see it already in Nehemiah while the city is being rebuilt, and the temple is being rebuilt. It's fascinating. You look at the post-exilic prophets like Zechariah, who has this message of return to me, return to me, return to me, very strong in the book of Zechariah. And finally, you get to Malachi, which I mentioned earlier. Malachi is a strong indictment to Israel. It's like, listen, you are in a lot of trouble. When was Malachi written? After the exile. They'd returned from the land. There were still problems. The whole sense of Israel's place and need for judgment has not been completed. And you can see that, just the last words of Malachi. Malachi is a tough book to read, but it really strongly highlights Israel's sin. Now, you also notice that there are passages that you might not really kind of think about are fulfillments of the Leviticus 26 blessings and cursings. Note that after the passage that I read about the opening passage, you have a series of blessing passages, blessing promises, and then curses. The curses are negative reflections of the blessings. And that's important in the book of Leviticus. You notice that these things kick off and begin to function straight away. God said that if you will obey me, a small number will put a large number of enemies to flight. Remember Gideon? Just a very small number of soldiers would have put a large number to flight. Gideon's stripping away of the soldiers that came to fight is drawn straight from the Old Covenant. And so the Old Law. And so here you have this tiny number of men. Well, God does the fighting. Look at Jericho. Small number of people, not really even having to fight. God does the work for them. But then, when they get out of covenant, as in the sin of Achan and Ai, you notice, we're in a lot of trouble here. God is, even though we send a small force to Ai, they're routed by the people at Ai. God is obviously not on our side. At this moment, we're kind of out of covenant. So you see all of these things happen as a result of God's covenant agreement with his people. You're in covenant with me, I'll care for you. You're out of covenant, I won't. Now, one other important thing that I want to have a look at is a verse that we saw in the last session, but didn't spend a lot of time with. That's the last verse in Leviticus chapter 26. These are the rules, these are the statutes and rules and laws that the Lord made between himself and the people of Israel through Moses on Mount Sinai. Why is that passage important? I spent a bit of time on this, and I think reviewing the session I misspoke one time, so I'll make this point very clearly here. The Levitical law was given on Mount Sinai to the people who had just left Egypt. So this was at the beginning of the wandering. So you had the wanderings, the time at Kadesh Barnea. You had this group of people who were not going to get into the land. They weren't going to make it. They just left Egypt, but they had to know the law of God, how to treat his sanctuary, about his Sabbaths, and so on. So Moses was given the law. When the law is restated later on in Deuteronomy, particularly from 27 to 30, it is restated for the children and grandchildren of those who first heard the Levitical law. Now, those who first heard the Levitical law did not have instruction about living in a land. It wasn't prominent to them because effectively they weren't in their own land. When you get to Deuteronomy, the people are being prepared to go into the land, so the law of Moses is restated, but with land-sensitive statements in it. Now we're going into the land. These are the things that are going to happen. Note again, please remember that I've said that my understanding is that Leviticus 26 informs Deuteronomy 27 to 30 and the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32. I know Don is doing some sessions on the Song of Moses as well, so it's wonderful to emphasize that particular great passage of Scripture. So, and you'll also notice there's another thing that I just want to draw your attention to, this whole sense that when the judgment of God comes to his people, there's a sense of inevitability and panic that occurs. I think if you read the judgments in Leviticus 26, you'll notice that God talks about panic. The people will panic. You don't even have to have God talk about it to realize when this happens, the people are going to panic. They're going to be in fear. I was drawn to a wonderful passage in the book of Amos, which is the most colorful passage about the futility of people trying to escape the judgment of God. Now, there's a lot happening in Amos chapter 5. The people had an ungodly festival that, as far as the commentators tell me, that they called the Day of the Lord. But Amos does a word play on this. I want to do a little more work on this going forward. Not for today, though. Let me read to you Amos 5:18 to 20, looking for this sense of panic here. When God's judgment occurs, Leviticus 26, when you disobey me and you're cast from the land, you'll panic. Have a look at Amos' statement of that here. This is really interesting. Woe to you who desire the day of the Lord. Why would you have the day of the Lord? It is darkness and not light. As if a man fled from a lion and a bear met him, or went into a house and leaned on his hand against a wall and a serpent bit him. Is not the day of the Lord darkness and not light, and gloom with no brightness in it? You see this sense of panic? I'm fleeing from a lion only to be eaten by a bear. I'm exhausted out in the house, I lean on a wall and a snake bites me. This sense of when I bring judgment, you'll panic. It's just so interesting. I used a phrase last week that I learned when I was supporting someone as part of my community work in court, and the phrase is, the law has work to do. I would say to you that the law of Moses, Leviticus 26 particularly, had work to do. We know it had work to do in bringing the judgment against Israel over time. We know it was working when Israel would be out of covenant, would lose a battle. We know that it had work to do in putting God's people into captivity, the first captivity to the Assyrians, and then finally the Babylonian captivity. We know it had work to do because it's quoted, it's referenced. Daniel references the law of Moses. We can see from the commentary at the end of Chronicles that the requirements of the land having to rest, which comes entirely from Leviticus chapter 26, or chiefly from Leviticus 26, had to be completed. That judgment had to be exhausted before the people could return from exile. So we know that Leviticus 26, that law, had work to do in putting people into captivity, and also it had work to do in releasing them from captivity. Daniel called on it. He prayed. He fulfilled all the requirements. The people had done their time, and Daniel called out on the people's behalf and repented so they could go back. That's why that prayer is in there. Daniel's prayer, we spent a lot of time reading it, is very important to understanding the end of the captivity and how these things work. So I read that, and you can go back and read it again, Daniel chapter 9, because it's the lead up to the Daniel 70-week prophecy. So how about the work that Leviticus 26 has to do? What's my time? Okay. Malachi said Leviticus 26 had work to do because the people had returned from the land. They'd fallen into sin. Malachi's indictment says, hey, look, these same things haven't been done. The law of Moses has work to do. The very last passage, you'd have to obey the law of Moses. So it still has work to do. So did the Levitical law, did Leviticus 26 still have work to do at John the Baptist's birth announcement? Yes, it did. How about Jesus' birth, his baptism, death, resurrection, ascension, or Pentecost? At Jesus' birth, were all of the demands and the judgments of Leviticus 26 exhausted? No. How about at his baptism? No. His death? Well, some would say, yes, the law was nailed to the cross at the death of the Lord Jesus Christ. We're going to test that today. So I would say no. I would say Leviticus 26 still had work to do at the resurrection of Christ. Even at his ascension, yes, still had work to do then. At Pentecost, at Stephen's martyrdom. Now, Stephen's martyrdom might have been no, except that Stephen quotes Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 32. How about Paul's conversion? Would that have been a good time for the work of Leviticus 26 to have ended? Well, it didn't appear so. What about when the Gentiles came in? What about the council at Jerusalem in Acts 15? That could have been a perfect opportunity to have said, this is the end of the work of Leviticus 26. No, maybe the tabernacle of David when that was being built. That's referenced in the same passage. Yes, well, it seems the law that Leviticus 26 had work to do over a long period of time after the cross. It was still functioning. It was still working. It was still active and had killing power. Very interesting. Often people are afraid to move from a long-held position because they've invested so much into it. I want to put up on the screen the definition of the sunk cost fallacy here. And this will describe someone who perhaps just will not entertain the notion that the law of God was still active after the cross. And I know that brings terror into people's lives. If they say, oh, there's no way I can admit that the law is still active after the cross. The sunk cost fallacy is the phenomena whereby a person is reluctant to abandon a strategy or course of action because they've invested heavily in it, even when it is clear that abandonment would be more beneficial. The sunk cost fallacy creeps into a lot of major financial decisions. That's kind of funny, you know. I was thinking about a televangelist who has preached some stupid thing for years. You know, I don't know. You pick it. If it's stupid, some televangelist is preaching it. And he's just preaching. He sold so many books and so many tapes. And he knows in his heart that it's just plain wrong. This thing he's prophesied is just not coming to pass. Oh, dear Lord. This is 2021. Have you seen some of the rapture preachers desperately trying to gather up current information, news from newspapers and so on? They look pathetic. Why don't you just admit we've never been right at all? Everything I've said has been wrong and I need to rethink this. I'm sure a lot of them know in their heart of hearts that's the case, but they have so much invested in it. It would be a profound economic problem for them to admit the truth or to admit the possibility. And so they commit the sunk cost fallacy. I'm going to keep this monster alive simply because I have to. I think that's the case. I want to challenge you today, if you're struggling, if you're falling into this default of the law ended at the cross, think a little bit more deeply. Don't be afraid of considering some of these things we're talking about today. What we want to have a look at is post-cross law events and observance. It's a big title, isn't it? Well, I just put the slide together and thought it looked smart. Anyways, we want to look at some events that took place after the cross that are still related to the law that we normally don't talk about in preterist circles. Just a couple of additional ones. I know we do talk a lot about Paul's statements that he only preaches the prophets. Don talks about that many times. We reference just a large number of standard things. I'm going to go to some unusual ones today that maybe we haven't considered. The death of Christ was promised to Old Covenant Israel, the resurrection of Christ, and the ascension of Christ. Read Psalm 68, you can see his ascension promised there. So we are seeing promises to Old Covenant Israel being fulfilled in what we call the New Testament, in the ministry of Christ and afterwards. Well, let's push this a little bit farther. I'm going to read a very well-known passage to you and make a couple of comments. How's my time? I'm okay here. When the day of Pentecost arrived, they were all together in one place, and suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. And divided tongues as of fire appeared to them and rested on each one of them. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. A couple of things, ladies and gentlemen. When the first law was given, the voice of God appeared out of flames, out of fire. Read it in Exodus 20. And where the Ten Commandments are given, and you can see that this sense of God speaking to us out of the flame. That should not be lost on you when you look at the new law, when you look at the new covenant beginning to take form here at the day of Pentecost. Now, the other interesting point here, very important point, is that Pentecost did not occur in an upper room. The events of Pentecost occurred in the temple. They were in the temple daily. They were during the intermission service during the temple when the Spirit of God fell. When this same event, this glorious event that we look back at, took place, its location is actually really important. Well, let's say it like this. Had we always understood that its location was important, it's like, yeah, okay, we get this. This is God fulfilling his promises to Old Covenant Israel, just as Peter said, quoting Joel. But because so many people have moved Pentecost to an upper room, we kind of get the sense that, okay, after the cross, after the ascension and the resurrection of Christ, Jesus is off doing things with the Gentiles. He's kind of away from Israel. And that's left us in a ditch in understanding our eschatology. It's not been a good thing. No, Pentecost occurred in the upper room. I'm sorry, did I say that? No, Pentecost occurred in the temple, not the upper room. That's really critical. So this is a post-cross law event that has everybody together. Now, an interesting passage, we're not going to do all of these just for time's sake, but I'm going to take you to Acts chapter 15. This is the passage that has the council in Jerusalem. This talks about the tabernacle of David being created. Let me read this, the judgment here. Therefore, my judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God, but should write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols and from sexual immorality and from what has been strangled and from blood. For from ancient generations Moses has had in every city those who proclaim him, for he is read every Sabbath in the synagogues. May I please read that again? For from ancient generations Moses has had in every city those who proclaim him, for he is read every Sabbath in the synagogues. What a great opportunity for those at the Council of Jerusalem to have said, yeah, but it's useless to proclaim Moses because his law is finished. What a perfect, it was like the golden opportunity that was missed. No, at this time, they were still proclaiming Moses on what day? The Sabbath. What was important about the Sabbath is that it was given as part of the law of Moses. This is still active. They're still acknowledging that this is the case. So we have the tabernacle of David. We've got this Acts 15, Amos 9 relationship. Again, I'm referring to the book of Amos more regularly than I anticipated at the beginning of this study for several reasons. But the one thing in the book of Amos is there's not much light. There's not much positive joy in Amos until it gets to Amos 9 and talks about the tabernacle of David that's going to be built. And it's a reference to that last day period. It's a great study. You can read up on that at your leisure. I want to take you to Acts chapter 20 and verse 16 and note what Paul is trying to do here. And we're looking at post-cross law observance here. So Acts chapter 20, 16. Paul had decided to sail past Ephesus so that he might not have to spend time in Asia, for he was hastening to be at Jerusalem, if possible, on the day of Pentecost. Why? Well, of course, we know that Jewish males were going to be in Pentecost. It was in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. It's going to be a feast day. They had to be there 3 times a year. But why is Paul trying to be there on the day? He could have lots of time to minister to Jews if he got there a little bit late. No, I just understand here the law of Moses, the feasts of Moses are still active, even though the new covenant is coming online. It's very interesting to see this. Come to Acts 23, to one of the most interesting exchanges that Paul has. And look at this. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law? And yet contrary to the law, you order me to be struck. Those who stood by said, would you revile God's high priest? And Paul said, I did not know, brothers, that he was the high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. And that comes from Exodus 22:28. You shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. Now look at this. Look at Paul's statement. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law, yet contrary to the law you order me to be struck? What? If the law was inactive, why would Paul say that why wouldn't Paul say, well, it doesn't really matter? Contrary to the law you think you believe, contrary to the law that was nailed to the cross, contrary to the law that's been abrogated. No, he said, you're judging me according to the law, and yet contrary to the law. It's very interesting. And then, of course, Paul even honors the ministry of the high priest. He apologizes. And he quotes the law, and he said, this high priest is still functioning here. The ministry of the high priest is really important in understanding how this eschatological change takes place that we're talking about. Now further, and I'm spending more time on Paul than anyone else here, but that's okay. These are just a few post-cross law observances that should make us think about things. Paul, in a passage that absolutely confounds the commentators, while I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple without any crowd or tumult, but some Jews from Asia, etc. That is Acts 24:18. I've just put that up there, not the remainder of the passage. So Paul is in the temple being purified. And you see, the commentators, very, very few of them will see this as Paul's honoring the law of Moses that still has to finish its work. And so they get very confounded by it. It's quite an interesting read to go through and look at what they have to say. So now we've seen that after the cross, we have the death of Christ. After the cross, we have his resurrection, his ascension, Pentecost, tabernacle of David, Sabbath observance. All these things either come from the law of Moses or are promised in the law of Moses, like Pentecost was, for example, in the tabernacle of David. Sabbath observance comes from the law of Moses. Then we have Paul trying to get to the temple at Pentecost, Paul in front of the high priest, Paul purified. So that's really interesting. It's time now for us, and what's my time like? I'm going to be okay, I think. Whoa, look at this. To have a look at the book of Revelation. Revelation Apocalypse. It is, you see the word clips in there? It actually shares in common with a couple of English words that we have. An eclipse, which is the hiding, the eclipsing of one heavenly body by another. And also the word calypso, which is a hidden bay. You can sail right past it. I kind of live in a sort of calypso at the edge of it, kind of where I live here, one of the most well-known bays in the world. And you can sail by, and then unless you're aware of the opening of this bay, you don't know that it's there. Well, the calypso, the apocalypse, Revelation is the uneclipsing of Christ, is the revealing of Christ. And that's why we call it the apocalypse. If you go back to my Leviticus 26 comments from the previous session, you will note that I said that Leviticus promised 4 sevenfold judgments if the people would not obey. David Chilton makes an interesting observation about the book of Revelation, and that is there are 4 sevenfold judgments in the book of Revelation. The 7 churches, the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls. That's very interesting. Others have found some variations on that, but I just think that's really interesting. The book of Revelation is structured with 4 sevenfold judgments. What did God say? If you do not obey me, I'm going to bring 4 sevenfold judgments on you. Now, there's many other places. This is something you can do without any misery at all. You can look at cross-references. In the book of Revelation, you can look for references from Deuteronomy 32, Deuteronomy 27 through 30, and Leviticus 26. You find there are many, and even the references from Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel will often have sources right there in the early law of Moses. Here's Revelation 6:8 for you. Have a look at this. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death. And Hades followed him, and they were given authority over a quarter of the earth to kill with sword and famine and pestilence by the wild beasts of the earth. Where have we heard this before? Let me pop this up on the screen. Leviticus 26:25, and I will bring a sword upon you. Leviticus 26:18, for your land shall not yield its increase. That's famine. Leviticus 26:22, and I will loose the wild beasts against you. Leviticus 26:25, I will send pestilence among you. All of these judgments that we find in the book of Leviticus chapter 26 appear in Revelation 6:8. Sword, famine, pestilence, wild beasts of the earth. You also see that in Deuteronomy chapter 32, 23 to 35, the same references exactly here. That he says, I will heap, let's pop it up here quickly. I want to just get through this. I will heap disasters upon them. I'm going to read this quickly. I will send my arrows on them. They shall be wasted with hunger, devoured by plague and poisonous pestilence. I will send the teeth of beasts against them, with the venom of things that crawl in the dust. Outdoors the sword shall bereave, and indoors terror, remember panic, for young men and women alike. Now here's a reference from a very good article by dispensationalist William D. Barrick, professor of Old Testament. I just wonder if what his position on the ongoing strength of the law is today, but have a look at his comments from an article called The Eschatological Significance of Leviticus 26. You can find this one online. Many of the horrifying judgments described in Revelation 6 and following find their original setting in the covenant curses of Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. And he gets that from Wenham on Leviticus and Hartley on Leviticus. The Wenham book I'm looking for at a good price. You got one you want to sell to me? Let me know. I had a question as I closed my last session for you. And the question was, is there any judgment from Sinai on that is not drawn? I'm sorry, I'm going to read this again. Is there any judgment of Israel from Sinai on that is not drawn from the law of Moses? Can you find one? Let me know. pastor@mascot.church is my email address. If you know there is one, I'd like to look at it. I'm asking a second question. I'm going to put them both up on the screen today, and that is this. Are there any judgments in Revelation that don't draw on the law of Moses? Are there any? Can you find any? Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? All the judgments I can find in the book of Revelation have their home in the law of Moses. Okay, it's time for a mind game. You own a tavern and your house is attached to the tavern, and that's your job. That's how you make your money. And one day you get arrested and appear before a court and sentenced to death. And you say, what's going on here? What's going on? And the judge says, well, there were some conspirators who met in your establishment, and we can't find them, so we're killing you. You say, what? Well, where do you get that from? How can you bring this upon me? Well, I don't understand. And the judge says, well, I'll read you the law. Please, Your Honor, read me the law. And he says this: if conspirators meet in the house of a tavern keeper, and these conspirators are not captured and delivered to the court, the tavern keeper shall be put to death, from the Code of Hammurabi, 1750 BC. Well, why is that not going to happen today? The Code of Hammurabi is abrogated. It does not have teeth today at all. There are several problems with that. First of all, you probably do not live in a land that was covered by the Code of Hammurabi. Maybe you do. If you do, God bless you. It's nice to talk to you. Even if you do live there, that law is no longer active. It has been abrogated. It has no more teeth. It has no more killing power. There's no way in the world that law can be enforced if you live in Patagonia, or you live in Belgium, or you live in any other country in the world. Even if you live in that land, the Code of Hammurabi is gone. No one can judge you for it. Now, dispensationalists have a kind of a cool workaround. It's a hack, but it's kind of interesting. They are aware, not all dispensationalists, by the way, but a lot of dispensationalist scholars are aware that the only way that the tribulation could possibly be in our future is if the Jewish time clock, now they don't really understand the implications of it, but if the Jewish time clock could be turned on again. So in their view, the Jewish time clock was turned off at some time, depending who you listen to, either at the crucifixion or whatever. Typically it's at the crucifixion. But in their view, it was paused and has to be restarted. And during that time where it functions, it will be possible for those laws to work. Let me just read something. I've just grabbed this off a dispensational website. You've heard this, but anyways, this is the dispensational hack to be able to make the judgments in the book of Revelation, Matthew 24, to make some of them work in our day or sometime in our future. There are yet 7 years of Jewish time that God revealed to Daniel that must be fulfilled. The Jewish time clock will begin to tick again when Israel makes or confirms a covenant with its enemies. So they say, well, yeah, we understand that today this couldn't happen. The church is here, all these things are going on the earth that are out of the Jewish time clock. Once you get the church out of the way, well, that will be fine. You see, they've had to work around. They understand something that the rest of us probably need to get to. No, preterists have we understand what's going on. We know what's happening. Interesting hack, though. The problem that we have is not that hard to understand. It's not that hard to settle. And in Hebrews chapter 7:14, we can see how this works. Now, if perfection, I'm going to read Hebrews 7:11 to 14. Now, if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek? Interesting. Rather than one named after the order of Aaron. For when there is change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. For the one of whom these blessings are spoken belong to another tribe, for which no one has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord has descended from Judah, and in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. Verse 12, for when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. This is why I mentioned the absolute significance of the priest the high priest in Paul's day. Paul is still honoring the ministry of the priest. He's still saying the high priest is still there. I'm still honoring your ministry, your work to whatever's going on. The law under which you operate is still functioning. Now the Lord Jesus Christ, full high priestly ministry is being revealed at this time. He is operating already in heaven. His full revelation is taking place at the end of the Old Covenant ministry. And look at my time. I need to get a wriggle on here to get this done. So this is really interesting. When the priesthood ends, when it changes, the law changes. What law is still functioning? The law of Moses, still flying, still working. Leviticus 26, still doing its work. Leviticus, in Revelation chapter 17 and 1, we're introduced to the work of a particular angel. I'm going to put 2 screens up as I roll this to a close here. I think I'm going to make it in my time slot. Revelation 17 and 1. Then one of the angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters. So these are the judgments of Leviticus chapter 26 that are working out, the judgments of Deuteronomy 27 through 30, the judgments of the Song of Moses that are being worked out against Israel here. And this angel says, I'm going to show you the judgment of the great prostitute, the great whore, Babylon, who's seated on many waters. Now the one who does the revealing is this one. He's one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls. Now this angel makes another revelation at a later time. I'll put the images back on the screen. Revelation 21:9. Then came one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues and spoke to me, saying, come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. So the very angel who reveals the harlot who's being judged, later on comes and reveals the wife of the Lamb, the bride. Leviticus 26, ladies and gentlemen, is about more than judgment. I would say that preterism is the only eschatological paradigm that does not have a childless, infertile bride. In other futurist models, the last event of human history is the marriage of the bride who produces no more children. Interesting, isn't it? You thought about that? So the theme of this conference is that God has fulfilled the laws, the promises to Israel, and in those promises then, and part of those promises is the benefit to the nations. The majority, I guess I would say that all, maybe if you went to full idealism, which I don't know a lot about, but if you went to the full idealist perspective on the book of Revelation, it might be a little different, but certainly any of the other paradigms that are not preterist would say the bride marries at the end of human history, and that's it. We go off into eternity doing something. The preterist position says, oh, no. The bride marries at the end of the old covenant, which is really the beginning of new covenant history. And then the bride says to the nations, the Spirit and the bride say to the nations, come in and be healed and be delivered and be saved. And this is this wonderful flow of text. Now, it's interesting that my core passage, the passage of Scripture I've spent so much time on, Leviticus 26, still has work to do. It's working all the way through the book of Revelation. It's working all the way through. It's either it or its children, which are Deuteronomy, the judgments in Deuteronomy, but it's working up to the very end. Leviticus 26 is about more than judgment. I'm going to take you to a verse in Leviticus 26. I've changed my font here to be a little sweeter and a little, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but it's just such a great passage. I'm going to read something from the blessing portion. You notice we haven't spent a long time in the blessing portion in Leviticus 26. Here comes one. I will make my dwelling among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. And I will walk among you, and will be your God, and you shall be my people. Well, that's one of the great blessings in Leviticus 26. Why are you quoting this, Al? Why? Let me read to you a passage that is drawn from Leviticus 26, 11 and 12. Here we go. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth is passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place, here goes, of God is with man. He will dwell with them, they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. Isn't that amazing? In the very closing words of the book of Revelation, as it's just getting ready to wrap up, as it's getting ready to say the bride is now married, the bride's job is now to bring in the nations. At this very time, this wonderful passage of Leviticus 26 is quoted. I'm going to be their God. They are going to be my people. Wow. Wow. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've done a timeline of the law of Moses, Leviticus 26 on until the book of Revelation. I truly hope that what has blessed me so much will bless you too. It's just been an honor to be here once again. It's just a thrill to be part of the Preterist Pilgrim Weekend 2021. My name is Al Person. You can contact me at pastor@mascot.church. Once again, I want to thank Don and the team for this excellent, wonderful opportunity. I want to bless you all and trust that you walk well in the things of God, and maybe we'll see you again sometime later. This has been Leviticus, Daniel, and Revelation, a preterist investigation. God bless you. We will talk soon.